So here's a particularly famous one in biology that I go into much more in the next course in coconuts, but I'll just lay out what the story is. If you've seen this before and you have a particular view of how this works, I want to sort that out right now. So here's a shrew. As I said, these things get down to a couple of grams, not so many. 3,000 kilograms over here, 4,000, something like that for elephants. It's a really nice range for mammals, at least. And there's this very basic question you might ask, and this connects deeply then into how ecological systems work and how life works on a planet. So we've got some energy usage by organisms, right? With these funny things, we're eating food and so on. We get very worried about that, but a lot of animals just eat their food. So we've got this is power, right? So this is basal metabolic rate. So this is, watts as in, joules per second or something like that, energy per unit time. And then mass. So mass is metaphorically the elephant in the room. When it comes to organisms, we think about all the other pieces they have, but mass is their big, right? That's the big index that you might start with. So how does this thing scale? So you would expect it not to grow faster than 1. That would be a little crazy, right? So superlinear would be a lot. And sublinear is possible. There's a good reason for that. It's the elephant shrew, which is a confused state of being. Okay. So nice. We've talked about prefactors a little bit. Often they're left out, as I've kind of pointed to as well. So that can depend on possibly body temperature. It's a nice little story here, potentially. So birds run a little hotter than us, right? A little bit of evolution there. Got them to flying, which is pretty crazy, coming out of dinosaurs. Strange story. But they're a little bit warmer than us. We run around here, eutherian, right? Placental mammals. Marsupials got the pouch situation, right? So a little bit, just a different branch. Turns out they run a little cooler. And monotremes, here are the fine exponents of these units here. The platypus and the echidna, the only ones we know about. There are a couple of types of echidna. Anyway, they are somehow, closer. These are closely related because they lay eggs, right? Which is just like, what are you doing, right? So these guys lay eggs, amongst other things. Beaks and the whole business, right? When the early Europeans, doing all the fun things in the world, when it came back from Australia with one of these, that was sort of thought to be in the kind of category of stapling things together, which a few of them had done, right? That was sort of an old trick, right? I've got this funny new animal, this chimera that I made with my sewing kit, but actually this turned out the beak was stuck on, right? This was really, really how it is. Okay, excellent animal. But this is an interesting idea, right? So that they run a little, so this prefactor goes down a little bit. Birds run hotter. All right. Anyway, but the scaling you might think is this, 2/3, dimensional analysis, right? This is, again, which we'll get to with buck and pie a little bit more generally. So power is going to be proportional to surface area, which is proportional volume to the 2/3. This is area. Volume is length cubed. This is length squared. So this would be a volume to the 2/3. And if density doesn't change much across these organisms, then mass to the 2/3. So why is it that? Because you'd think, you're giving off energy, you have to be balanced. You're giving off energy in other ways, right? Depending on what kind of organism you are. Breathing, for example, right? Lets out a certain amount. Dogs pant and all sorts of things. We sweat. There's a sort of strange mechanism, but there's just simple heat loss, right? Strange things have sort of becoming. It's thought, so if you do a marathon or something and really hard work, you can lose many pounds, right? Some people will lose a lot of pounds. It turns out apparently that's not all just water. The idea was that was all water, right? And then we go to this bad place where people just replenishing themselves with water potentially became fatal, right? This hyponatremia because they thinned out their electrolytes so badly. And it looks like you are low on water, so people have more water and then that pushes them past a threshold. But it may be just energy, right, being consumed, right? You're actually losing the energy that's stored in your body and it's being put out as carbon dioxide. Hard to measure. All right, okay, but this is a fair thing that this is why we can use the infrared thing to find people at night and so on. Only for good reasons, because we give off heat. So isometric scaling, right? And it's not quite a spherical cow, but at least, we've got as we go up through our shapes, that nothing's being stretched in a weird way. Right, allometric is not the same, okay. Little physics joke there. All right, so log normal fluctuations, this is a detail, but you expect to have, say, Gaussian fluctuations in the log of p as a function of mass. Fair enough, right? For brain size, the koala is down the bottom. All right. Okay, so Stefan-Boltzmann Law, you don't have to worry about this too much, but this is this amazing achievement coming out of physics about 100 years ago, I suppose, that the energy lost out of a black body is proportional to its surface and then temperature to the power of 4th. So surface, again, so surface area is just sitting there, kind of, it makes sense. And in fact, if you do the calculations, you can see this with a lot of data. But there's been about 100 years where, close to 100 years now, I guess starting in the 20s, where people have said this. They've espoused that it's 3/4. And this is in textbooks. It's a very strange result. It's just a difference of a 1/12, 2/3 to 3/4. So it means that as you go up through mass, that biology, for whatever reason, evolution is producing bigger and bigger organisms, and they have to run at a slightly lower, a higher power than you might expect. This is not their maximum performance, right? This is just basal. It's just, sitting there, keeping alive, like Pratchett basically does. Okay, so this is a bit odd, and as I said, it's a thing we'll talk much more about in the next course. So it would suggest a kind of an inefficiency, right? Somehow it's not working out. There's a beautiful idea that, well, let's think about it. We've got a supply system, right? It's a network story. We've got a heart beating and then a network coming out of that, right? So we've got our arterial blood flow going out, venal blood flow coming back in, and we're distributing to all these little sources, all these little capillaries. It's a very, fantastic kind of story. And you might think, well, how does that work with cities and all other sorts of things where you've got, material going in and out, in that case, maybe people. Let me just point out a couple of other pieces. So then if this is true, then you get all these other things. Number of capillaries is scaling as mass to 3/4, so it's actually, so if you like, the density is going down, right, as you get bigger. This is a beautiful one. These are not necessarily true. I'm just saying that this is how it sort of all spreads out. Time to reproductive age scales its mass to the 1/4, so that's slow, right? So you can double the size of something, and you certainly don't get anywhere close to doubling how long it takes to reproduce. Heart rate goes down, and this is true, right? If you get a hold of a mouse, and the tickers are going very fast, and right, it goes down as you get bigger. So the trend of these things are true, right? So time to reproductive maturity goes up. Yes, that's different to lifespan. Lifespan's quite weird. You can get cockatoos or whatever that live for 100 years and can say swear words that your great-great-great-grandparents said, or beautiful things, whatever it was. Cross-sectional area of the aorta, so this is connecting to this blood, the flow idea, right? So that's scaling. Another potentially powerful one, population density. So a couple of these fit together in really nice ways. I'll talk maybe a little bit about the heart rate one. But population density, so if this is really going in exactly the opposite way to that energy usage one, which is mass to the 3/4 supposedly, then these balance out. And it means that elephants are sparsely distributed and mice are much closer together. But as a collective, they use the same amount of energy, which is so that's a very interesting ecological story. It may not be 3/4, right? But that broadly, roughly may be true. And if it got out of balance, then maybe, the bigger things are using more or the little things are using more as a collective. All right, so maybe this is true, but let's just put in these exponents. And then if you multiply these things together, right, so the average number of heartbeats in a lifespan, right, is, put these things together, mass to the 0. So there's this notion, and it ends up in poems and all sorts of things, that mice have the same number of heartbeats, about 1.5 billion or something, as elephants do. They just run at a faster thing. And it's roughly true, right? So this is actually roughly true, right? It's true that, they don't live as long and their heart beats faster. So but this is going to be scattered. It'll be an interesting thing to really dig out some data on that going ahead. Anyway, so 1.5 billion. Anyway, so the Church of Quarterology gets a tarot card for itself. It turns out that there's been an amazing amount of arguing about this, and that's all I want to, okay, there's this too. Again, it's next semester. There's been an amazing amount of arguing and theoretical sort of development, remeasuring things and so on. 2/3 holds up remarkably well, and it just turns out that people did some bad things with slide rules and all sorts of stuff that triggered this whole kind of social kind of phenomena basically within science that herded in the way of this 3/4 thing. So it matters, deeply. This is how we, what do we understand about life itself? And then things like toxicity, for example, if you have something for a mouse, how do you scale that up to a human? So there's some very, important things that come out of it. All right.